Here's a question for you. When was the last time you deleted something important? Something that felt superfluous, like it was in the way? Maybe even something that was working, something you were proud of. But you got rid of it anyway because you could see that holding on to it was costing you something, something valuable. That's what this episode is about. Hi there, my name is Prashant, and welcome to this experiment, a place where we try to think a little differently about creativity, work, and what it means to be original in a world that keeps pushing us towards being average. And today I'm trying to unpack destruction. And by that, I don't mean the explosive, burn it all down kind, although sometimes that might be appropriate. But I'm talking about the more deliberate, disciplined kind of destruction. The kind that is, in fact, a creative act, maybe a very important one. The great artist whose mind I deeply revere, Pablo Picasso, once said, and this is attributed to him, so take it with the usual pinch of salt. He said, "Every act of creation is first an act of destruction." And I've been turning that over in my head for a while now, interpreting it from every which angle. And the more I think about it, through the lens of art, business, science, everything, the more I'm convinced he was onto something that we probably consistently underestimate or even forget. See, we're all really good at building, especially now in the age of AI. We love to build stuff, we love to add stuff, more features, more decks, more content, more work for ourselves. We celebrate the builder, the founder, the creator. But we've very little language or patience for the person that comes in and removes things, the subtractor. Let me tell you about a set of prints Picasso made in 1945 and 46. They're called the Bull lithograph series. There are 11 prints in total, and they represent, in my view, one of the most quietly radical things that any artist may have ever done. So, Picasso starts with a bull, a fully rendered, anatomically detailed, realistic looking bull. Muscle definition, texture, the whole thing. It looks like something you'd find in a vet's textbook, and the details really pop out. And then in each successive print, he starts taking details away. A line here, a curve there, a detail that your brain was initially convinced was essential to the picture. And you watch that bull evolve. It gets simpler, leaner, less literal, and somehow more real, more raw, essentially more bull like. And by the 11th print, what you have is an almost abstract skeleton, a few lines, a suggestion of a bull. But there's no mistaking that it's a bull. And that is extraordinary to me. Now, what was Picasso actually doing? He wasn't losing information or aesthetic appeal. He was trying to ask, what is the irreducible truth of this thing, of this object? How far can I push it? What can I remove and still have a bull? And what he discovered and showed us through this process of iterative subtraction was what actually mattered. See, in design and engineering, there's a principle called elegant simplicity. And the paradox is that achieving elegant simplicity is that it's incredibly hard. Anyone can make something complicated. It takes real discipline, even real vision, to strip it back to its bare essence. A French writer, the guy who wrote The Little Prince, said something about this. He wrote, "Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away." Which is pretty profound. So the question for us is, can you apply this to what you build, what you create, your work? Because what I think happens in most businesses, at least, and even creative projects, is that we start with a vision with that may be clear and elegant, and then we involve more people. We go through more rounds of feedback. We add a feature because one customer asked for it, or we add a slide because someone in the room, some executive, wanted more data or whatever. We keep building out literally because addition feels like progress. And what we end up with is a realistic, detailed, anatomically correct bull when what we actually needed was the little squiggle, the skeleton that still tells you that it is in fact a bull. Toyota understood this, the car company, when they developed what became known as lean manufacturing. The foundational insight was radical subtraction. So you identify everything that doesn't add value and eliminate that. That's what they did. Excess inventory, overproduction, motion that doesn't result in output, gone, deleted, removed. They call the things they removed muda. I think I'm saying that right, meaning waste. And by relentlessly removing muda, they built out one of the most efficient production systems in human history. And this wasn't merely a cost cutting exercise, it was a genuine belief that complexity is a form of failure. That every unnecessary step, every piece of inventory sitting on a shelf is the organization admitting that it doesn't really know what it wants and what matters. Another good example is Steve Jobs. When he came back to Apple in 1997, the company had over 350 products, several SKUs, and he killed 70% of that line, of the product line. Not the worst ones, he killed all but a handful of the best ones. And he was going from the realistic bull to the skeleton, so to speak. And even the 80-20 rule, anyway, says that 20% of your products yield 80% sales. So you don't need all of them. So I pose this question to you. What is your bull? What have you been adding to? Maybe it's a product, a business, a presentation, even a piece of writing. What is it that might actually be better, more powerful if you took something away? Now, aesthetic destruction is what we just talked about, removing complexity from what you produce. That's one thing. And then there's conceptual destruction. This is about removing what's in your head before you start building. What do I mean by that? Well, the assumptions, the habits, the legacy thinking that reside in our minds. The stuff that worked before, so you keep carrying it forward, even when the conditions that made it work no longer exist. You have to get rid of them. Picasso talked about this too. He would approach familiar objects like a face or a guitar and deliberately refused to see them the way he'd always seen them. He'd fracture the perspective, look at it from multiple angles. And I keep thinking about how rarely we actually do this in our work, in our organizations. We almost inherit a way of doing things, right? It comes with a default because it worked before. It made sense at some point, and we just keep doing it the same way. Not because it's the best approach, but because dismantling it feels wrong, maybe scary, hard, if it ain't broke, right? Marie Kondo built an entire career and cultural moment on a version of this principle applied to your home. You probably know about this. The method at its core tells you to hold every object and ask, does this spark joy? And if it doesn't, regardless of its value, regardless of what it cost you, you let it go. Now, I know that's a show about tidying up, but what she was really talking about is the psychic cost of accumulating things. The way that holding on to things, ideas, habits, whatever, That creates a form of invisible drag. You're carrying more than you need, and it slows you down in ways you probably can't see. So in business, right, one of the more audacious versions of conceptual destruction might be this concept called zero-based budgeting. So the standard approach, corporate budgeting, is fundamentally a form of legacy thinking. You take last year's numbers, you adjust them incrementally, create a forecast from there. And in doing so, you inherit all of last year's assumptions and about what mattered, what doesn't, and what's worth spending money on. Zero-based budgeting blows all of that up. Every budget cycle, you start from zero, essentially. Every dollar has to be justified from scratch, not because it was approved last year, but because it earns its place now. It needs to earn its place now. So companies like AB InBev and Kraft Heinz have applied this and discovered enormous efficiencies in their operations. So the destruction is the point here. You can't see clearly through layers of inherited logic. You have to remove those layers first. And here's a counterexample. Since we're talking about companies, Kodak invented the digital camera in 1975. We all know this. I mean, literally, an engineer there built the first one internally inside Kodak. They held the future in their hands. But they couldn't bring themselves to destroy that present. The film business was profitable, was doing well, and it was what they knew. The people making decisions had built their careers on it. So they held on to it. Even when digital came along, they saw it, but they couldn't Marie Kondo their own business model. They couldn't ask the question, does this spark a future? And answer that honestly. By the time they did let go, it was too late. The letting go happened to them instead of by them. We might be seeing this play out in industries like printers today. The thing about conceptual destruction is if you don't do it voluntarily, the market tends to do it for you. And that tends to be a lot less considerable the market tends to be a lot less considerate towards you, a lot less gentle about it. So let me pivot for a second to talk about Hindu cosmology. There's a concept there called pralaya. It appears in several mythological texts. Pralaya is cosmic dissolution, the periodic destruction of the universe. And the key thing there is it's not a catastrophe. It's not something to be feared or avoided. It is a phase, a part of the cycle, an essential rhythm. The universe unmakes itself so it can be remade. Shiva, in this tradition, is the destroyer. Destruction is his gift. He clears the ground, makes space, and the belief is that what comes after the destruction will be better. Not despite the destruction, but because of it. And what I find remarkable is that this cosmological intuition maps so cleanly onto what the best artists and the best innovators seem to understand intuitively. Destruction is not the opposite of creation, it is its prerequisite. You know what's interesting about the blank canvas or the blank page? Everyone talks about it as a symbol of possibility. And it is that. But it's also terrifying, genuinely terrifying. I can vouch for it as a writer. And I think the reason it's terrifying is that it represents total accountability. You can't defer to what was done before. You have to begin anew. You have to let go of what came before, even if it was good. Maybe especially if it was good. Because the good stuff is the hardest to release. The failed attempts, you can walk away from them, but the successful ones have identity wrapped in them. right? Ego, the comfortable voice that says, this worked before, why would you change it? And that voice is not wrong exactly, but it is backward. The creation requires a forward facing orientation. Destruction, then, is the act of turning around. So, how do you actually do this? How do you apply deliberate destruction aesthetically and conceptually in the work you do every day? I want to offer up one practical exercise. I'm calling it the destruction audit. So, first, you find the accumulation. Look at whatever you're working on, a product, presentation, creative project, and ask yourself, what is being added to this over time that wasn't in the original intention, original plan, and what's here because someone asked for it, not because it's actually essential. Or maybe it's always been here for some reason. In architecture, there's a discipline called adaptive reuse, taking old buildings and repurposing them. The best practitioners of it don't renovate by adding things, they strip it first. They take the building back to its structure, its bones, and then decide what to keep and what to build. They find the original intention before they layer in the new one. So, what's the equivalent move in your work? What are the bones of what you're building, and what is accumulated renovation on top of them that's needed? The critical caveat is to make the destruction purposeful. Because I don't want to leave you with the idea that destruction is inherently always good. Blowing things up for the sake of it is just chaos, even evil. What made Picasso's Bull series remarkable, what made it art instead of just progressive erasure, is that every line that he removed, every curve that he got rid of was a decision. He was destroying towards something. Same with Steve Jobs. He didn't just eliminate products randomly. So you need to do the same. When you audit what you remove, think about the why and the what. What are you ultimately trying to reveal by taking something away? So I leave you with this. We live in a world that is absolutely obsessed with more content, more features, more AI. And there's a kind of creative courage in all of that generating and building. And I'm not trying to dismiss that. But I think there is an equal and arguably rarer kind of courage in the opposite direction. The courage to say, I'm not going to add. I'm going to subtract. I'm going to delete. I'm going to trust that what remains will be stronger for it. That's the creative process. Not just addition, destruction, and addition, in that order. So look at what you're doing, remove something deliberately, purposefully, and see what it reveals. Begin by first ending. And I'll talk to you soon. Stay curious.